Andrea, you have to unmute.
Andrea, you're muted.
Hi, I'm Andrea Levine. I'm the program director at Temple Beth. Good morning to all of you. I apologize for the lack of bagels, but I encourage you to BYOB, bring your own bagel, to our virtual Sunday salons. We had such a wonderful turnout last month, and I'm so great to see that continue this month. I know Etta worked so hard to put these together for you, so it's always very validating to see such an amazing response. So I am very honored to introduce the one and only Etta Gold, our congregational librarian, and a woman who loves books more than anyone I've ever met, to introduce our speaker.
Unmute, Etta. Unmute.
Okay. You're right. I'm so delighted for this morning's presentation with Sylvia Gorinsky. Sylvia has presented before to our Sunday Salon. She's a historian and so delightedly a local historian. And I think this is a subject that is pretty personal and dear to her. So Sylvia, take it away.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This is not the way that we decided to do it, Etta. Etta, introduce the Sunday Salon, and I will introduce Sylvia, please.
Before you do, Yoram, I do want to just say that if you all see the chat icon at the bottom of the screen, the bottom middle, that's where you should write any questions that you have during the presentation. And Yoram, my partner in crime, my partner in programming, the program director of the Jewish Genealogy Society of Greater Miami, he will now introduce Sylvia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Etta. Well, I will do a little bit what I was thinking you were going to do, because the Sunday Salon is really one of the events that is something to cherish, and I hope it will continue with Temple Beit Am for many, many years. And I'm very proud to have Etta as a partner with us. Anyway, Boker Tov, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the first Zoom event of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Greater Miami, together with the Sunday Salon of Temple Beit Am. For those who don't know me, my name is, as Beth said, Yoram Millman. I'm the Vice President of the Jewish Genealogical Society of Greater Miami and a past president. My roots are from Eretz Israel, Hungary, Bessarabia, Eastern Europe, although I was born in Cairo, Egypt. I'd like to acknowledge our president, who is here today as a participant, Paulette Bronstein. She's a terrific human being and genealogist, and she's being an active creator and partner to all our activities. And we are, of course, grateful to Etta, the senior librarian of the temple, and Andrea Levine, the young and dynamic programming manager of Temple Beit Am. And thank you so much. Actually, we are working together with Etta at Sunday in the Sunday Salon in the library for about 8 years already. We addressed around 8 to 10 events each year with full range of topics related to genealogy and our Jewish heritage. And sure, we want to continue that, but we face challenge to keep a live conversation. I believe, however, that with the global exposure that we are getting these days, will work well. In Hebrew, it says, Me'az yatsa matok. This is a phrase that those of you who read the Bible in Hebrew will know what I mean. It relates to the story of Samson and Delilah. It's actually saying that something good results from a bad situation. Look at our audience today. We will not see it even at our meetings at the Jewish Federation unless we were scheduled to talk to an international convention. Today's participants include presidents, directors, officers of other genealogical society in Miami, in Palm Beach, in Georgia, in Israel, university professors, scholars, and enthusiastic audience eager to enrich their knowledge. And we hope to see you all in the future event. And this brings me now to Sylvia Gorinsky introduction. Sylvia is a native of Miami, FIU graduated. She is a local history educator and guide for context travel, Flamingo Gardens, the Miami-Dade County Women's Park, and various local universities, including FIU. She's a co-host and of the television series called Roadside Florida, which is produced by the Florida Moving Image Archives. And she worked at WPLG Channel 10, the Jewish General and History Miami Museum. Her honors were included 2 Florida Associated Press Awards for editorial writing and Peter Jennings Project Fellowship for Journalism. Sylvia is also a part of our advisory team when it comes to Florida heritage. Few years ago, she was taking us on a tour by foot, exploring the Yiddish culture history of Miami Beach. Once the pandemic is over, we will explore repeating and expanding this type, especially that it has a universal appeal. So as for your lecture, as you were informed before, if you have any questions, please write it down in chat and Sylvia will be happy to answer it by the end of the presentation. Okay, now Sylvia, the podium is yours. You were introduced.
Good morning, everybody. Boker Tov, bienvenidos. And this is, I'm a baseball fan and I've been following the postseason with the Marlins and now Tampa Bay. And today, this is my first of my Sunday doubleheader because I have a program about women's suffrage later for another organization. So I'm very happy to be here and have a little bit of the sense of the program today because of my background, my family's background. My own parents came with my paternal grandmother and my sister from Cuba in 1962. I was born here in 1968 and spent most of the first 4.5 decades of my life as a member of the Cuban Hebrew congregation. So there is a little bit personal here and I might interject. And of course, the Jewish history of the Western Hemisphere, colonizing that took place in the 1600s. And of course, the first Jews coming west tended to stay in the Dutch territories, more open towards the Jewish community, and of course, avoid the Spanish territories. It was the time, after all, of the Inquisition. You have representations here, recreations of Christopher Columbus's expedition to the West, and of course the story well known. And there are questions and studies still ongoing as to whether there might have been crypto-Jews on the Niña de Pinta and the Santa Maria. There are still studies taking place, and actually one that has generally been confirmed, Luis de Torres. And when Columbus landed in San Salvador in the Bahamas, de Torres disembarked. He was said, in fact, to have a Jewish background. And Eda trying to hold up a book about him?
The Sails of Hope by Simon Wiesenthal, about the supposedly the secret missions of Christopher Columbus. Know that one?
And de Torres, he was said to have, I believe, Halevi was his actual name, and was a translator in multiple languages, including, rumor had it, Hebrew, to different people in Spain. So he was valued, and Columbus used him as a translator as well. And he was also to communicate with the native tribes that Columbus found as they sailed west. De Torres landed in the Bahamas. Hence, by the way, his connection to a synagogue that there was for a number of years from the 1970s until a few years ago in Freeport. I was trying to, after Hurricane Dorian hit the Bahamas, I was trying to find out about the effects on synagogue named for him. But there was a source who told me that, in fact, the synagogue had closed previously before the storm. So the search there is still ongoing. Now, the Torres sadly would not last long in the expeditions of Columbus. Now, Spanish colonization of Cuba meant that there were Inquisition offices and there were people cracking down on anybody who would have been Jewish, practiced Judaism. So there was on the record no such thing in Cuba before the 20th century. Now, the efforts to liberate Cuba from Spanish control were going on throughout the 1800s. And Moses Elias Levy, who is a major part of Florida's Jewish history, was among those who tried to raise money for those who were looking to take arms against the Spanish government in Cuba. And of course, the marker there indicates his background descended from a family that in fact had left Spain for Morocco during the heart of the Inquisition. Moses Elias Levy was born in Morocco, gradually sailed west and wound up in Florida. He tried to create the Pilgrimage Plantation, which was kind of a combination of a kibbutz and free territory, no slavery there, and tried to persuade other people to move there. It was in the middle of the Second Seminole War in Florida, so it did not last long either. His son, David Levy Yulee, was Florida's first senator and first Jewish senator, had very different views from his father, but Moses Elias Levy was responsible for trying to support the rebellion against the Spanish in Cuba. And then by the 1890s, Jose Marti. And Marti came to Key West in particular. He was, among other things, a lector, a reader in the cigar factories that employed so many Cuban workers in Key West. He would read from his own readings and from his own writings rather, and was responsible for part of the rebellion, a good part of the rebellion that took place, and the kind of the call to arms of the Cubans who were in Key West. And he was very much influenced by the Old Testament, by the Torah. He wrote at one point, Moisés no ha muerto, porque Moisés es el amor. Moses has not died, for Moses is love. And the Jewish community of Key West had begun to blossom during the 1880s, many of them immigrants from Romania. And one of the successful merchants, Louis Fine, invited Jose Marti to use his front porch in his house in Key West to speak publicly. It became known as Terrazo de Marti, Marti's, literally Marti's porch. And when the Spanish-American War took place in 1898, there were members of the Jewish community who got involved in the U.S. Army to fight, as well as the Cubans who went back to fight. Of course, Marti died in the conflict, and so many others as well. But one of the results was the opening up of Cuba to a relationship with the United States. Now, it would take almost a decade, 1906, until the first formal Jewish congregation was started in Cuba. And it was actually started by a minyan of mostly Americans. United Hebrew Congregation, founded in 1906. And this is actually not the building itself, but this is the entrance to the cemetery section of the United Hebrew Congregation. And in fact, interestingly, one of Fidel Castro's last public appearances before his health took hold was at a centennial ceremony of the United Hebrew Congregation. Now, the vast majority of Jews who came to Cuba in those early years were Sephardic, because this also coincided with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So a lot of Jews coming from places such as Morocco. And you had the founding of the oldest Sephardic congregation in Cuba, both of these, by the way, in Havana, La Habana, and Shevet Achim, or I guess it was pronounced there, Chevet Achim, with the CH. And that was founded during the 1910s. Now, Jews continued to come from mostly of Sephardic background through the mid-1920s. The end of World War I would start to open the gates for Jews coming from Russia, from Eastern Europe as well. So there have been various studies that have been going on about the number of Jews who were in Cuba at any given time. And it varies according to the source. One estimate has had 24,000 Jews in Cuba by 1924. Quite a few, a rising class of merchants there, and working class, not the professionals yet. However, there were many others who also had in mind Cuba as a stop before heading to the United States. Now, during the 1920s, Cuba was starting to benefit economically, but there were people who decided to just continue northward, so that Cuba became known for some as Hotel Cuba. And by the way, this is downtown Miami. During the 1920s, during the height of the Florida land boom. So, and you start to have during the 1920s and 1930s, even after the collapse of the boom and even during the Great Depression, you start having really the first generation of people coming from Cuba to South Florida. And this in addition to Cubans who had previously come to Key West and to Tampa during the 1800s. And some members of the Jewish community started to come as well. Probably one of the most famous among them, or among the descendants, I should say, is Cantor Rachel Nelson. And in fact, I believe her grandparents had come from Cuba during the 1920s to South Florida. Now, during the 1920s, the Zionist movement also began to bubble up in Cuba, campaigns starting to go on for a Jewish homeland. Now, other campaigns started as well, and background to what would happen in Cuba in 1959 was various turnovers of government and the start of the Communist Party as well. And one of their principal members was Jewish, Fabio Grobart, who was a founder in the 1920s of Cuba's Communist Party and would be lionized by Castro and others much later. Now, there were also during the 1920s different communities getting started around the country, Camaguey. And if you look very closely at the building, you kind of see, this is a former synagogue and kind of faded examples of the Magen David here. Santiago, where there is a Jewish community still holding on today, see a small synagogue set up there. Guantanamo, not the military base, but the community. And Santa Clara. And again, you have communities that still continue to hold on. Now, Machado becoming the head of Cuba, and it coincided with the rise in anti-Semitism. And of course, the 1930s also has a global rise in anti-Semitism, the rise of Nazi Germany, and the eventual takeovers in Europe. And there were problems for the Jewish community in Cuba as well. Ramon Grau's time in the presidency included the law of 50%, which was a law intended to kick Jews out of the business community. It said that any business had to be quote unquote Cuban owned, which meant that the owner or half owner would have had to be born in Cuba. And this was intended to push aside those who had migrated from Cuba pretty much at least since the end of World War I. But while there were people such as Machado, Grau, there were also people such as the mayor of Havana, Guillermo Belt, and he, in 1935, led the celebration that took place of the anniversary, at the time, the 800th anniversary of the birth of Maimonides, Rambam, in Spain. And Rambam, of course, at the height of Spanish culture before the Inquisition, he was a teacher, a doctor, a scholar, physician and philosopher, as the coin says. And that celebration took place in Cuba in 1935. Now, the increasing issues with anti-Semitism would lead to the darkest moment, really pre-1959, which was the trek of the ship SS St. Louis, which attempted to come to Cuba with 937 passengers to disembark there. There had been other ships that had come into Cuba. Only 20 visas were accepted, though. And Federico Bru, head of Cuba at the time, and I've had conflicting sources, one that he was anti-Semitic, others that he was pressured by anti-Semites in the government not to accept the vast majority of passengers on the St. Louis. And of course, the sad trek, very famous, with the boat drifting off the coast of Cuba, then off the southeast Florida coast. And the Jewish Cuban community did not have enough money or other resources, financial or political, to be able to lobby the Cuban government to allow those passengers in. Other efforts by the Jewish community in southeast Florida and U.S. Jewish communities to lobby the administration of President Franklin Roosevelt did not work either. Of course, State Department filled with anti-Semites among a lot of the principal leadership, and other things. Sadly, the ship went back to Germany, and most of the passengers perished in the Holocaust. And this would have, by the way, political repercussions even for years later, Elliott Roosevelt, who was later the mayor of Miami Beach. And there have been people in Cuba who have examined, starting with the 50th anniversary in 1989, among, and later on 1999, the 60th anniversary, among cultural and academic exchanges with the United States, with other countries, examining what happened with the St. Louis. Now, a strong U.S. military presence in Cuba during World War II And Cuba was also open territory. Besides the Jewish community, also a number of Jewish American military personnel who were able to take advantage of heading to the synagogues, and the rise in businesses, including the rise of the kosher restaurants, one example. And post-war in Cuba brought about an expanding merchant class, an expanding class in services such as kosher restaurants, and also a rising business community, white-collar community as well, as it is called. And the beginning of the State of Israel, again, the very powerful and popular Zionist movement in Cuba as well, and Golda Meir at one point early in her political career would pay visits to Cuba. I believe it was one of them came when she was labor minister of Israel. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society would also play a role in helping the migration to Cuba after World War II of Holocaust survivors. A lot of people had come from Poland, from Belgium.
And, you're just sort of looking at it yourself and you're wondering if anybody's out there. So it's very nice to see some humans. It's very rare these days.
Oh, all right. Now, there was also a thriving Jewish press, a newspaper, Habaner Leben, created by Sender Kaplan. And of course, Sender, a lot of people know Sender Kaplan's family. I went to school with his granddaughter, Stacy Belford Cohen. And a lot of people know the family in Habaner Leben, a very prominent newspaper in post-war Cuba. And you see the Zionist Union of Cuba, Unión Sionista, again, the strong support of Israel that came from the Jewish community, in particular in post-war Cuba. And a thriving cultural circle as well. Centro Israelita in La Habana, which was basically their equivalent of the JCC in Havana. It had all sorts of events, cultural, sports. My dad played for the baseball team there, which was managed by a Cuban baseball star and who had also played in the U.S. Negro Leagues during the period of segregation, Bienvenido Jimenez. Centro Israelita was also where my parents were married. So it was a place they knew very well. And again, a lot of events of all stripes, Shabbat dinners, Shabbat services, and just a thriving culture. And then by the mid-1950s, the construction of El Patronato synagogue in La Habana, in a residential neighborhood. Famous post-war modern design, Emilio Capablanca. Let me try that again. Capablanca, I believe the name of the architect who designed the building, which has very famous mid-century modern architecture. And the Orthodox congregation, main Orthodox congregation in Havana, Adath Yisrael, and one of its associate rabbis, Rabbi Dov Rosenzweig, a Holocaust survivor, and I will talk about him in just a bit. Now, the 1950s starts to bring the storm clouds. Fulgencio Batista, who had previously had been the head of Cuba, took over again, this time with a military dictatorship. And one of his buddies was Meyer Lansky, reputed mobster. And they had various partnerships in terms of casinos and other things. And the Riviera Hotel in Havana, one of those partnerships where other people were listed as the official owners, but it was really Batista and Meyer Lansky. This, by the way, the only major architectural design done by a South Florida architect, Igor Polovitsky, Russian-born and famous for the Albion Hotel on Lincoln Road. And 1959 comes Fidel Castro. And always some interesting, and people have asked questions because, of course, Castro cracked down so much on the Catholic Church. And people have asked questions about Castro's relationship with the Jewish community. And the answer was, it's complicated. When his daughter, Alina Gonzalez Revuelta, came to the United States during the 1990s, she insinuated that Castro had some sort of Jewish background. Again, no sourcing yet to confirm that. And of course, one of the fallouts is the hundreds of thousands of people who came from Cuba, including roughly 90% or more of the Jewish community, majority of whom came to live in South Florida. By the way, there were 500 Jewish children who came as a result of Operation Pedro Pan, which was largely geared towards organized by the Catholic Church in Miami, Father Walsh at the time, later Monsignor Walsh, among those organizing. But there were also 500 Jewish children involved in that. Some of them, which we know here in South Florida's Cuban community, Jewish community. And they would continue to come through the mid-1970s, the freedom flights that took place as well. And a lot of people processed at the Freedom Tower, also in, pardon me, Opa-locka Airport. And there, the Freedom Tower originally, of course, famously, the Miami Daily News Tower, built in 1924, wonderful building, used from 1962 to 74 to process so many hundreds of thousands of Cuban refugees, health and community welfare, job training, and other programs as well. And by then, you start having organization of groups. I'll go through all of them. And one of them, of course, in 1961, organized as El Círculo Cubano Hebreo de Miami, originally to get news from Cuba, excuse me, and to lend assistance and resources to those who were trying to come in. And they had, this kiosk was set up at Opa-locka Airport. Now, today it's Lincoln Marti School, located in Little Havana. The building was once the YMHA, the main YMHA in Miami. And among the students who went to school there was my sister. And it was one of the places where she came here as a toddler, learned English there, and they had Hebrew school there. It was in operation pretty much until I think before the Michael Ann Russell JCC opened in 1973. Now, the one of the people who were coming tried a number of synagogues. They've talked of basically a chilly response from a lot of them. One place where they found welcome, originally known as the North Shore Jewish Center in Miami Beach, and of course later became Temple Menorah. Rabbi Meir Abramowitz really welcoming them. Rabbi Abramowitz would later say that he thought that it would not be a long tenure for the people who were coming from Cuba because of the history of governments turning over after several years. But there were families, Temple Menorah now on 4th and 5th generation of families going there. And there's Rabbi Abramowitz. Rabbi Abramowitz had been a chaplain, military chaplain during World War II, helped in the rescue of Holocaust survivors, including his later wife, Rachel. Now, back to the creation of El Círculo, and that came about for various businessmen, Enrique Calusin, Bernardo Benes, Felix Rehler, Oscar White, and others as well, who met to put together, again, this organization. And you see original location for offices on Washington Avenue. The congregation was able to get the auditorium of Washington Federal, where Bernardo Benes worked, in order to have services. The first services started in 1964, Daily Minyan and Shabbat, and later on High Holy Day services. And of course, for many years, the Delito Hotel hosted El Círculo's High Holy Day services until the permanent large synagogue was built. By 1968, the Sephardic community, which had started out in the Cuban Hebrew congregation, created their own synagogue starting on Washington Avenue with their own site. It was originally known as La Cava, I think, for the cave, and located on Washington Avenue. This is the building where they were. And the congregation's continuing to grow. This is a parade of Cuban Hebrew congregation from the 1970s. And on the end there, I believe that's Rabbi Rosenzweig. And now also the design of first the small synagogue by member and architect Oscar Sklar. And he has been responsible for the design of Cuban Hebrew congregation and Temple Moses. Here is the first permanent building, which opened in 1975. And I've always thought that architecturally it was kind of a counterpoint to the entrance to El Patronato. And if you saw the picture of El Patronato, you might remember, had a white door with the 12 tribes, and this with the hemispheres in the doors, kind of dark. And kind of a 180 counterpoint. And Temple Moses. The Sephardic congregation of Florida in 1979 got its permanent site on 71st Street in Miami Beach, Normandy Isle. And of course, Temple Moses, an Orthodox congregation. Cuban Hebrew was Orthodox until the larger synagogue opened in 1984 and then switched affiliation to conservative. Temple Moses remains Orthodox, and the membership Cuban and also these days from other parts of Latin America. And you have the era of the Cold War going on in the 1960s, 1970s, and back and forth between the United States and Russia, and basically the chess pieces that included the Middle East, that included parts of the Caribbean, Central America. And one of the examples in 1974, Castro invited Yasser Arafat to train his PLO there in Cuba. In 1973, Cuba had broken off diplomatic relations with Israel. They'd had those relations for the first 25 years. You might recall the picture before of Golda Meir. One of Golda Meir's early roles, by the way, was as Israel's ambassador to the Soviet Union. And this was at a time when it was unknown what role in the Cold War the Israeli chess piece, if you will, would play. Now, there were people in the community who were interested in trying to see where opening up would go. One of them was Bernardo Benes, banker by trade, and I mentioned he was one of the founders of Cuban Hebrew congregation. And he began to have meetings with the green light from the Carter administration in the late 1970s, went to Cuba. He had come with wife Ricky and I believe their oldest child from Cuba shortly after Castro came to power. Met with him at risk to his life. And I should mention that Bernardo was kinfolk. Ricky Benes, her maiden name was Gorinsky. So she was a second cousin to my father. And he went, the result was the freeing of, I think about an estimated between 1,200 and 1,400 political prisoners during the late 1970s. But Bernardo undertook great risks. At one point, there was a bomb that was placed in the lobby of the bank where he was working at the time. And he was also part of the group, though, in 1980 from Cuban Hebrew congregation that went to El Patronato and was able to come back, had met with the leaders of El Patronato, came back with a Torah, a Talit, and several other things. This is the small sanctuary, by the way, at the Cuban Hebrew congregation inside that small shul. And that was where the artifacts were taken at the time, and a connection established. Let me see. This was part of a New York Times article. In 1980, there was joy in the synagogue of the Cuban Hebrew congregation here this evening because Yom Kippur prayers were read for the first time in years from a Torah once used by many of the same worshipers in Havana. And by the way, those prayers would have been read at the Delito Hotel services at the time. And there was sadness because by bringing the Torah as well as a yarmulke and a talit prayer shawl from Havana to Miami Beach, the congregation had symbolically cut the sentimental cord that bound it to Cuba. For most Cuban Jews in this area, the memories of life in Cuba have not faded away. Many were born there and Spanish is their native language, but unlike other refugees, virtually all of whom have relatives or close friends in the island country, most Cuban Jews no longer have people to tie them to the land where they used to live. At the time, and this was an estimate in 1980 of about 800 people left in the Cuban Jewish Cuban community. That number has also fluctuated through the years, and Bernardo spoke about the conditions there at the time. Now in 1984, the large synagogue was built for Cuban Hebrew congregation, and of course the windows celebrating the 12 tribes. Oscar Sklar also responsible for the exterior design. Inge Puppet Trampler, I believe, is the name of the designer of the Bima, which celebrates the Jewish holidays. Now, the Jewish Cuban business community also started to really make headway into the general community. George Feldenkrais, who had acquired Perry Ellis International, and very famous with all sorts of different productions. They tried also the Guayaveras, the famous shirts, and were actually one of the sponsors of an exhibit that they had at History Miami a few years back when I was still working there. So that has been very famous, and Feldenkrais family involved in that. And Isaac Zeltzer, during the mid-1990s, first Cuban president of Greater Miami Jewish Federation. So the community settled el exilio, but still settling into South Florida. Now, 1990s in Cuba brought about the first major renovation of El Patronato, the main synagogue, still the main synagogue for the Jewish Cuban community. Dr. Jose Miller, for many years, was the leader of that community. And he was the head of it when the members of the Cuban Hebrew congregation came and met with them in 1980. Adela Dworin, more recently the leader, and she was supposed to have a program, I guess about a year or so ago, actually at visiting South Florida, coming to Cuban Hebrew congregation, apparently health issues, and I would have been very interested in listening to that to find out what is going on today. And again, El Patronato remains a center in Havana for the Jewish community for everything from the daily minyan to health and medicine, to cultural events and a Scrabble tournament. And since the early 1990s, there are no official diplomatic relations between the United States and Israel. There have been some overtures, and in fact, there was a migration from Cuba to Israel during the early 1990s that was known as Operation Cigar, and helped along by the Canadian government. And various visits that take place, and of course the majority of them coming from Canada, but some coming from the United States as well. In the early 2000s, there was a dedication of a Holocaust memorial in Havana as well. I mentioned the discussions that had started, the academic discussions that had started to take place about the SS St. Louis, and also a formal Holocaust memorial, and another one in Santa Clara, which actually featured stone, I believe, that had been brought from Europe to Santa Clara and to that memorial. Now, one of when Pope John Paul II went in 1999 to visit Cuba, of course, opened the door to the Catholic community, and there were people hoping that it would also open the door for the members of the Jewish community as well. Still questions about that. Now, the 21st century, 2014, Alan Gross, the release of Alan Gross. Alan Gross had gone to Cuba in 2009 with computer equipment with the idea of supplying El Patronato, arrested by the Cuban government, accused of being a spy, thrown in jail, and was in pretty bad shape when he was visited by International Red Cross and others, some U.S. members of Congress as well. And he was released in 2014. It was part of a swap, also part of the efforts at normalization of relations by the Obama administration. Of course, President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama paid a visit to Cuba in 2016. Now, of course, recent pullback from that by his successor. And we don't know what's going to happen yet as a result of the election that is coming up. And the question of how many Jews remain in Cuba, you saw that New York Times article from 1980 that said 800. There have been estimates of anywhere from 600 to 1,500 to as few as 25. Now, there is a Rabbi Shmuel Steinhandler from Chile, who has been conducting services for the community, has flown in from Chile rather, during the High Holy Days, Pesach and other times. Also a hotel actually in Havana that has catered to Jews internationally called the Hotel Raquel. People could call there, and when they were put on hold to the music, John Williams music from Schindler's List. Kind of interesting, and also featuring a Shabbat elevator. And again, various interactions continue between Israel and Cuba. And again, as yet, I check every so often to see if there is any further formal interaction or effort of formal relations. Nothing as of yet. Now, back to the numbers of Jews that remain in Cuba. There are a lot of theories that a lot of them have been people who converted, and questions also about whether they were legitimate conversions and so forth. In the 1990s, Rabbi Isaac Meir Lau of Israel had said, we are embracing, we accept the conversions that have taken place in Cuba, all of them. And there have been back and forths about whether some people have converted in order to partake in Havana, in particular, of the resources provided by El Patronato. But there are minyanim, there are various organized events. And things got far enough along between Cuba and Israel that a few years ago, Cuba was able to send a baseball team to the Maccabiah games. And they did pretty well, of course. Baseball, national pastime there too. Now, the Cuba America Jewish Mission has been around, based at one point in Baltimore, I think also San Francisco, that has worked with other international groups to bring resources, particularly during the major holidays, Jewish holidays, to Cuba, to the Jewish Cuban community, and has done so since the early 1990s. In the aftermath of the success of the movie Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg paid a visit to Cuba as part of a cultural educational exchange. There's Dr. Jose Miller talking to him. And Spielberg grew very interested in Cuba's Jewish community. I've been wondering, as far as I know, he has not produced a documentary of any sort about the community yet. Waiting to see if he is interested in doing so. And this bar mitzvah in Cuba reflecting, again, the continuation, the efforts of the community there. Meanwhile, here, you're looking at Temple Menorah, and Temple Menorah probably at this point with the largest South Florida Jewish Cuban membership. And again, I mentioned fourth and fifth generations, Lador Vador. Demographics have shifted in South Beach so that there has been a struggle in recent years for the Cuban Hebrew congregation. Temple Moses, I mentioned, has gone more international. And interestingly, Broward County synagogues are starting to see a rise also. I live in Davie, and I go now to Temple Beth Israel Sunrise based, but there are some people who are members now who used to be members of the Cuban Hebrew congregation. So when I worked at the Jewish Journal, one of the reporters did a story where it said, we keep moving north, we keep moving around. So wanderings always. And the future, look at a visit to Cuba from a couple of years ago and examining a family cemetery plot there. And again, in the short term, it's going to depend on what happens during the elections. And there are young members of the community who are interested in interacting with the Jewish community that remains in Cuba. And again, connections with the members of El Patronato, other communities as well. And we shall see, I guess, is the best way to describe it. And with that, let me look at the list of chats first, because I know a lot of people posted. And
I can tell you that something that one of the first comments that came from Ruth. I'm not sure who Ruth is, but it was a very similar story to my husband's father in the mid 1920s from Grodna Gubernia, Poland. Could not get entrance into the United States. That's when the United States had really limited immigration from Poland. Anyway, so he did go to Cuba. He was able to get to Cuba. And I see there are several other people that have that same story. Ruth, Phyllis Lehman. Phyllis?
I'm reading.
Um,
I'm reading Ruth's story now about
Yeah,
this. And,
about her family. Yeah. Anyway, and I know that
Emily
Rochelle-
sang some photographs of people from the area. I'm not sure. I know that the Jewish Museum, FIU's FIU Jewish Museum of Florida, had been having a collection that I think was started back when Sender Kaplan and his wife were still alive. And I think dedicated in their memories. You can get in touch with the Jewish Museum if they are conducting a collection, if it is about the Jewish Cuban communities and also South Florida's Jewish Cuban communities as well. They are collecting those, I believe, as well. Now, at one point, they were supposed to have an exhibit about it, and they had a small photographic exhibit in the second gallery, the photo gallery, a few years ago, I think, but not the one that they had originally been planning. But you can always ask the Jewish Museum about whatever plans they have. They have had on occasion speakers about the Jewish community in Cuba and also the transition to South Florida. And Yoram, my family reached Cuba. My father's family reached Cuba about 1926, coming from what was then Poland, settlement of David Gorodok in Poland. My mother's family gradually went from Poland to Cuba during the early to mid 1930s from Pinsk. And I like to joke about the fact my mother was a landsman of Shepherd Broad, who left Pinsk a lot earlier and went, of course, first to Canada and then to New York before coming to South Florida. And yeah, reading the recountings about people who went to Cuba, and then Phyllis, her family coming up to New York. And yeah, I'm reading Marnie Dixon's account of going with Federation to 3 synagogues. And we still have family in Cuba. My aunt and 2 cousins. And actually, over my shoulder here, this is actually a picture of my 2 cousins when they were teenagers. So this was some years ago.
Yeah. Cute. Very cute.
And yeah, a group of us from Temple Beth traveling to Havana with Cantor Nelson 2016, shortly after Castro died. She officiated a Shabbat service at a patronato, and that would be very interesting in hearing about that. And a question about the literacy program and about the issue that Bernie Sanders ran into earlier in the year. And yes, there was a lot of education, general and Jewish education in Cuba long before Castro went into power. You know, my dad graduated with his accounting degree from the University of Havana. What year? About 51, 52? In the 50s. I'm getting it from a primary source, so.
Yes. That helps. My husband's family that had to go to Cuba because they couldn't get into the United States. Some of them stayed in Cuba until, of course, the revolution, and then they went to Puerto Rico. They were business people. I think I think that was pretty common, though, too, because Spanish was their first language, and after Yiddish.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's one worth examining, which is the Jewish community of in Puerto Rico. And of course, a lot of people went to Puerto Rico from Cuba after Castro came to power.
Yeah,
I'd have to examine again the
Yeah.
number of Jews who went there. I know the general
Percentage of
community
Jews.
numbers were very high. As early as 1919, turned away from Ellis Island and sent back on boat that next went to Cuba from Marcos Maya. And thank you, Paulette. And
Are you watching? It's interesting, no? Bye.
Well, I'm so impressed
people to
with-
people trips will happen again after the COVID-19 restrictions lifted. Well, again, there remains for the time being cultural and educational programs that can take place. Those were actually permitted by the Clinton administrations, the Carter administration, and what got shut down for the time being were those that the Obama administration had implemented. And again, in the short term, I mean, we'll see what happens, what the situation is, both politically and health-wise, probably by, they're talking about 2022 when possibly things might be able to start returning to pre-pandemic. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to depend. It's a long and winding road, to quote the Beatles, and we'll see how it works out.
We just don't know. I hope you're reading Janice Baseman's
I'm reading
post.
it, and let me ask about Cubillon. Any relation to Hela and Jose Cubillon, I wonder? Who were, Hela was a cousin of, well, wait a minute, what was her maiden name? Hela's maiden name? Yeah. Hela?
Tío Jose and Tia Hela and Tío Jose were my grandfather's. Jose was my grandfather's brother.
All right.
How are they related to you?
Hela is a cousin of your father.
Of daddy? Not you?
Huh?
Not you.
No.
Not you. Okay. Okay. Apparently my father, my father's cousin.
I had a feeling you and I were probably somehow related because it's just the way that works out.
It's great. Great to meet you.
Likewise. So ask are you with your mom?
What, my mom, she's describing it. Say again?
Hela's father.
Okay. Hang on. I'm getting an update here. Hela's father.
Hi, Ada.
Hi, Janet. That's so cool. I love that.
Okay. So she was your cousin, not daddy's.
Jewish geography.
Yeah, right. Mm.
Now I'm confused again.
Yeah.
But Hela's father
Is a brother.
A brother of your grandmother.
Oy.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So your father, not my father. Is your hang on. Clarity is emerging. This is sorry, this is my bad. I'm misinterpreting what my mother is saying. Hela is a cousin of my grandfather.
Hela is a cousin of your father.
Okay, I'm still lost.
Not of your father.
We'll get it. We'll get it. Ask your mom if she ever went to, Adath Yisrael.
Did you go to the Orthodox synagogue, Adath Yisrael, at all? Ever?
Huh?
Did you ever go to the Orthodox one, Adath Yisrael?
Washington Avenue?
No. In Havana, the Orthodox congregation.
It was never I lived.
Yeah. Okay. So they went, I think, once in a while, but they mostly went to Centro Israelita, I think, in El Patronato.
Yeah.
It's good to meet you. I'll
Nice.
contact you after. Can you
I don't know where,
leave an
I don't know where to find me.
Okay. All right. I'll ask Etta then. And
Yes.
the owners of Moishe Pipik, which I've heard a lot about. And I wonder since I grew up on the kosher restaurants in South Florida, I wonder what Moishe Pipik served and how close it was.
I thought that was a
It
punch.
was fabulous. It was a fabulous restaurant. It had the best rye bread in the world.
It's my second cousin.
Okay.
Porque mi primo era el padre de él. Eso lo puedo decir. El primo, my brother was who was a shoifer.
We're still figuring these out. And yeah, a couple of people this morning from Institute of Jewish Knowledge and Learning. Good morning to you. And I'll get the information. Archives available in Cuba to research manifest records of ships entering Cuba before World War II. That's a good question. And I don't yet know the answer. And Janice sent another one about in the photo. Yes, the family cousins from Puerto Rico. I'm gonna have to start putting together a program about the Jewish community in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, because of the census, my cousins, and they went to Puerto Rico. So I'm looking at Betty Steven going, whoa.
And as far as the records that go, it's I know that there have been various academic efforts in which the Cuban government has been working with, for example, Harvard University, the Kennedy and the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library on various records. I don't know if any of those relate at all to the Jewish community in particular, but can try to find out. And a member of the community from Venezuela. And let me see, I'm trying to, but I think that's the last. And Ignacio Sternberg, and your sentence cuts off, whatever you were writing. I think that's the end of the sentence. Many people came from Cuba and went to Venezuela. And of course, the issue that they've contended with twice. Here we go. And
yeah.
And the movie that was shown. And yeah, I mean, I've seen in recent years, there have been a lot of things written, a lot of books written. Ruth Behar has done some chronicling, and I forgot, it's right across the room from me, and I forgot to grab it this morning. But a rabbi who wrote an excellent book, actually, about the Jewish community of Cuba that had a lot of details. Etta might have it. Levinson, I think, is the name of the author.
Well, I do have a list of the items that we have about the Jews of Cuba in our library. We have, I think, 2 DVDs, 2 videos, documentaries, and the rest are books. And also Ruth Behar has a new book that just came out called Letters from Cuba, which is, it's actually for young adults, but it's very, very sensitive, very lovely. She's incredible. And she has come to our Sunday Salon in the past too. I'm not sure if the list of items in our library is going to be available for people to print out from here, but if not, I can certainly email it to anybody. Our library, just to put in a little a little boost for us too, is open to the public. We have, we're probably the last and the largest library of Judaica in South Florida. There are maybe more Judaica items at the universities, but those are limited to university students and professors. If you contact me, all you have to do is go to our Temple Beth Am, to our website, which is tbam.org. If you do tbam.org/library, you will have a link to explore our collection and contact me, and you'll enjoy what we have. We have an incredible collection. And
¿Ya se acabó?
No.
That went to
¿Ya?
also around the Caribbean. Yeah. I have. And actually, there was a multi-part series on the Jews of Latin America and the Caribbean that I did for, I think for FIU a few years ago, and about the different, and yes, my ancestors, again, 1920s, 1930s, coming from Poland. So yes, Ashkenazi, Paulette.
Good, Paulette. We're going to, if there's any more questions, can you please post it ASAP, because we're going to wrap things up. I do want to announce that, well, first of all, give my absolute thanks to Sylvia for such a marvelous presentation. Thank you so much. We need this. We need things to connect us all and to let us know that it's all mishpacha, right? But besides that, it's so it's just so enlightening to understand the whole broadness of the Jewish community and how we do come together. We are going to have more Sunday salons on Zoom. In fact, we have 2 scheduled for November. One of them is, just to show you, if you can see this, where are the grown-ups? This is a book by a woman who's going to tell us all about it. It's her family history, and she's going to be joining us from London, England. That's the one really positive thing about not being able to meet in person and doing it on Zoom, is that we can have presenters from all over the world and watchers from all over. I thank you all for being here, and please be in touch if there's anything you need or want to ask, and come again. That's all I can say. Come again. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Anna.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Etta. Thank you.
If anybody wants to contact me, contact Etta. She'll get the word to me. Thank you.